Hey, everybody, and we are live. Hi, Kristen. I've been looking forward to this. So, you probably know a bit about Kristen and her book because you're here, but we're actually going to make this very conversational. We're going to talk about a lot of things, and I think we're just going to jump right in. If perchance you're not familiar with me or Kristen, you can find more details on LinkedIn, but rather than doing an intro, we're just going to jump right in. So I always love to know more about where folks are joining us from. So just name, geography, wherever you are, anything like that would be really helpful. And there's no particular time that you have to wait for questions. You can really ask at any time. But about 30, 40 minutes in, we'll start to focus more on questions than some of the things that we had decided to talk about up front. So as you know, this is one of my favorite topics. So we're going to start right there. The structure of the data science team, who they report to. I've seen it start in a line of business like marketing because maybe somebody in marketing was the first to get excited about it, or it could report to IT. I've seen everything. What have you seen out there?
Yeah, same. I mean, and especially 10 years ago, working as a data scientist, we reported up through marketing. And I think the problem that I see with that sometimes, like nowadays, I really like to know that I'm going to report up through senior leadership that is really well-versed in data, just because you can get into a position where you've got a green team, there's difficulties with the data, and then it just becomes like, oh, these people can't deliver, right? And they don't sort of understand or care to understand exactly why you can't deliver, but it's just that you're not delivering. And so I've seen it up through marketing, I've seen it directly up through a CDO, I've seen it go up through tech, and I feel like almost any way works as long as you have visibility at the level of leadership. And one of the things that I really like to, talk against is the idea that I've seen, when the business feels like they're having difficulty getting results from the data science team, sometimes a marketing group or somebody else will spin off and say, you know what, we're going to hire our own analyst. And so they will hire this, junior analyst and embed it directly on this marketing squad or whatever. And that person gets inundated with ad hoc requests. They're typically not scoped appropriately. They may not have the hypothesis testing background to understand when it is they need to push back or all the context that they need on the data. I think that sometimes, people don't understand the intricacies and things that we're considering when we're working with data. And this person just gets like barreled over. And I've seen it, more than once not be a success. So I think like my overarching message is, that you need to have the correct leadership for these analysts and data scientists, and that it doesn't really matter who they go up through as long as they have visibility at a high level by people who understand, like truly understand what it is that we're trying to do and can help us be successful.
You've already raised some really interesting issues. Let me put a little bit more context here for folks because I can tell that we've had some similar experiences. So what we're talking about, everybody, is a situation where a company perhaps doesn't have a data science team yet. And we talk about AI and how all these things are rapidly changing, but there's still organizations out there that maybe have IT and BI, but have a little more than that and are still lacking this. So these organizations are still out there. But what can often happen is you might have a very specific issue that's arisen within the line of business. So we happen to both mention marketing because marketing analytics is often associated with data science. But it could be in manufacturing. It could be in banking. I remember working on a project where basically the project reported up through the CFO because we were trying to find fraudulent invoices. But the way you phrased it clarified something for me, actually, that I hadn't thought about it this way before, which is the line of business is, they might even go outside first. They hire the data scientist. But what they're almost certainly going to miss is the data science infrastructure piece. I've never heard of a line of business hiring an MLOps engineer or hiring a data engineer, right? So what ends up happening is it starts as a seed. It all starts probably as a very positive thing, but then it grows. It starts supporting other teams. So now you've got somebody in marketing who's doing a project on finance, really just because they have the skill set. And it starts to unravel a little bit. And it seems like we've both seen that.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and it's just the asks from the business. Sometimes you really need that person who can prioritize, who can think bigger, because at the end of the day, when it comes to your yearly review, or when it comes to the end of the year and the business is saying, like, what value did you provide? If you've got a bunch of ad hocs that were really small and you were creating Excel spreadsheets that other people could use, you don't have any bullet points to put on a slide, and it's really hard to validate your position. But at the same time, they absolutely needed you, and there was plenty of work to keep you busy, but you don't look very sexy.
Yeah. I want to acknowledge a couple of folks, because actually we have folks joining from all over the place. We have we'll see if I have an eyeglass malfunction today. My glasses broke, so I'm wearing my spares. We have Mubarak joining from Morocco, Gilmar from Portugal, Michael, I know that name, Michael. Welcome from Long Beach. My colleague Julia from Cleveland, my colleague Leslie are joined. Christy, wow, a lot of folks are joining from. We've really got a lot of diversity here. So listening to you, the other thought that came to mind is, what about the center of excellence idea? I certainly think that sometimes that works, but is that always the solution? Is that, if it grows within the line of business, but it grows beyond what it can do within a single line of business, is that where you go next?
I mean, I do love the idea of a center of excellence. I think, we're constantly thinking about it's funny because they're data projects, but the majority of the time when things break down, it's due to communication, because these organizations are so large often, and we think about how simple it is, how we could go through the pipeline hypothetically and solve a problem, but really at the end of the day, you have stakeholders in multiple areas. You have people helping you get that deployed, you have members on the finance team, and the more senior people are asking for it, but it's the less senior people who have the understanding of the data. Right. And so there's all these people that got to come together, and coming up with a way anyway to be able to, intake projects in a way where everyone is informed that needs to be informed, getting that scoping done correctly up in front, and making sure that the data set, because you can get in these meetings that have like 12 people in them, you're not able to talk about, like, hey, when we talk about this thing that we're trying to solve for, what does that really look like in terms of the data that we have available? And sometimes those conversations aren't happening. They're more high level, and there's intricacies everywhere. But really trying to get those people in a room who can set that data scientist up for success and fully understand the problem so that they can go get data and start it. And having those people available that, we know where to go to find the people who understand the data and can get that for us, because there are issues where sometimes it's a finance project and you got to go over to the finance team, and now it's a project for marketing and you got to go over to the marketing team, and now we're working with our sales agents or whatever, and that's different people, different data, right? And so it does make sense to have things centralized in a way that we're able to go and speak to the people who can help us, because I've also seen issues with, the finance team not being able to prioritize helping get you that data because they have their own initiatives that they're working on as well. You are not their highest priority. You're not even on their roadmap, right? Like, you're coming in as a data scientist from the left and trying to get on their calendar. And I believe that having a center of excellence does help. I think that there's also many other ways that it could be structured and work, but it just all, needs to fit in with the business that you've got, and try and, get things streamlined, and at least have an understanding of the blockers and issues and being able to devise a solution, whether that's a center of excellence or not.
You know, it's really remarkable because we've been traveling in the same circles for a while, so we've known of each other, and I spent some time with your book. But you're mentioning a lot of things that we've never talked about before that are really similar experiences. You know, you're talking about IT and the data scientists have, well, presumably they both have access to the data, but what you just mentioned about finance is really interesting because finance might even have their own data mart.
Yes, no, and I
So,
typically see that. I typically
yeah.
see that you can't even access it through GCP. There's someplace else, and
Sometimes the silos are literally manifest in infrastructure like that. So when I was listening to you, one of the things that I was pondering was I'm always really big when I sit down with clients about the whole idea of an analytics portfolio. And this is something that my colleagues have further shared enthusiasm for because it's really helpful. So when you've got a center of excellence, particularly the way you were describing the form that it can take, the tricky part is you've got IT and the data scientists, focused on the data because that's what they need to solve the problem. But as you mentioned, you've got senior leadership, they have the problem and they also have the funds,
Yep.
So, and there's not a lot of time. Sometimes senior leadership, you might get 30 minutes a month, with them, or maybe only just 30 minutes at the beginning of the project, and you might not see them again until midpoint of the project or something, depending on how senior they are.
Yep.
Who sets priorities? Because the head of the center of excellence might be like a senior manager or a director. They're probably not a C-level. So how do they deal with the fact that they've got very senior folks that head up all these lines of business, all of whom think that their problem is the problem that the center of excellence should put at the top?
Yeah. So right now, the way I like to do it is through a steering committee. So we basically get an intake. I've tried to minimize that as much as possible so that it's not a blocker to somebody actually using the form that's going to allow us to all be able to communicate well together. But once we go through there, it goes to a steering committee that's going to have people from all parts of the business, and we are going to duke it out, and talk about, try and get a sense of, the back of the envelope calculations of how much do we think it's worth? Is it saving man hours? Is it actually generating revenue? And come together and look at, okay, based on the bandwidth that we have available, what are we able to pick up now? What's the highest value project? And then looking forward, what do we think we want to really be able to, attack in the next year because we think that it's going to revolutionize the business? Or
again, we're observing some very similar things out there. Internally at Further, we like to create an AI council because almost certainly what we're talking about isn't just traditional machine learning. It's going to be large language models and stuff like that, all of which is on our plate today. We speed along. But yeah, so we try to encourage clients to create an AI council, and then we have a member of our team on that. And then the trick is to identify the other folks within the organization to do that. So the portfolio business that we were talking about is part of that, but then it also gets into governance, and it also gets into ethics and a whole bunch of other things. And I'd love to go down that rabbit hole actually, but I do want to turn to MLOps because that was one of the themes that we're going to definitely talk about. So briefly, certainly you can define it because it's young enough that there's probably a little bit of debate there, but mostly, and I think you do a good job of this in the book, why does it exist? Why do we need it now? Whereas maybe 10 years ago, we were doing some of those things, but it wasn't a separate role. It just wasn't like it is now.
10 years ago, I don't think I was doing any of those things, right? And these tools for MLOps really sort of started to come on the scene around 2017, 2018. And so in 2012, what it looked like when I was, fitting a model, I'd be trying, if it's time series, I'm trying all these different lags. I'm trying different ways of smoothing price. I'm trying different variables, and I'm writing it all down in a notebook. And then, the look of horror on my boss's face when I gave my notice, because he knew that I was taking all of what I had tried that went into building these models, and I was taking it with me, and I do like to think that I'm pretty good with documentation. That is one of my things. But at the same time, with experiment tracking, it's really, some of these platforms are incredibly simple. Like with Comet, you create an account. It's 3 lines of code. It's, the API. It's the name of your workspace. It's the name of your project. You run your model and it's tracking everything. It can show you, here's where I tried XGBoost. Here's where I tried logistic regression. Here's where I tried a random forest. And it's going to compare all those precisions for you. So you can look and say, okay, here I had the best recall. Here I had the best precision. This model looks like it's the best to me. And so you're saving time, but also you're able to, if I want to cross-train somebody else, I'm now able to sit down and be like, these are the algorithms that I tried. These are the different things that I tried. This one was the best. So that next time when they do it, they don't go through the same thing and duplicate all this work. Or if the business says, hey, that thing you did, can you, do an analysis of this metric or whatever, just answer this business question using what you used for that model. Now I can go and with data versioning, I can get that exact same data set and be able to do this analysis in a way that my numbers are going to foot and things are going to make sense. Because if I go and I try and grab a different data set, now I might potentially get different numbers. Now my butt's going to be spending 2 weeks trying to figure out why those numbers didn't foot. And so these companies in this space are largely targeting the more deep learning companies with deep learning initiatives, which makes sense, right? They have they're running more expensive models. It's a bigger pain point. It totally makes sense for them to be over there. But from the beginning, I have been very big on the fact that this is for the data scientists. The data scientists needs to be doing experiment tracking. They need to be doing data versioning so that you have everything in order, so that if you get audited, so that your results are reproducible for, just good science in general, right? It's incredibly important. It saves time and it helps you. I put down the school bus detector computer vision model for 2 months.
Yeah.
When I came back, my data was everywhere because I wasn't following my own damn advice. And
Yeah.
it saves time. It helps with collaboration. It helps with when people attrit and move on to a new company, and it just helps yourself for when, rather than having to take notes or keep things tracked in Excel, you actually have a methodical way of comparing your models.
Just for fun, it will be a digression, I suppose, but we can make it brief. Could you comment a little bit on the school bus tracker? Because I know your followers get a kick out of that. I saw, I called Scott. I don't even think we have to share his last name. Was commenting about that. If you know which Scott we're talking about. By the way, we've added Bangalore, Dallas to the mix. I think we're going to run out of push pins pretty quick. We're all over the place. So just comment a little bit of the origins of the school bus tracker, because it's just kind of a fun thing.
Yeah, so this was actually my first foray into computer vision. I've always been a data scientist working on tabular data, but basically I bought a cheap $60 camera. It is now currently right over in my window facing the school bus. I took video using the camera of the school bus passing my house. I'm lucky that the school bus has to pass my house, pick somebody else up, and then comes and picks my kids up at the end of my driveway. And so I took a video of the bus passing my house and I annotated it. So I won't bring you through all the different iterations of data that I made while trying to figure out how to, train a computer vision model on my own data, but I definitely made some mistakes. But so basically what it is now is it turns on at 6:30 in the morning every day. When it identifies the bus, I get a text that shows me a picture of the bus just in case it's a false positive. And I also get an Alexa alert that says the bus just passed with 87% confidence. And so this makes it so that I can make my English muffins in the morning without having to stare out the window to make sure or question whether or not we missed the bus. So it is by far the most useful project I've ever done.
We all do fun things like that. A lot of times, maybe it's to talk about at a workshop or something like that. But the fact that you can do like fun playtime learning, picking up a new skill, but also have it be so practical is just really fun. And I hope you don't mind if in the spirit of Halloween, I promote a video of yours that I stumbled upon, which I just think is so enjoyable. The data science scary. Yeah. As your son gets older, he was wearing a mask, but as your son gets older, I don't know if he dreads people bringing up that video, but it's just hilarious. So we should put that in the comments. Yeah. Data science scary, I think would be enough. Yeah, Christy gave and thank you for your comment, Christy, my colleague, gave a +1 to the value of reproducibility. Yeah, so I was gonna come clean and admit that I've had similar experiences. If we jump in a time machine, go back 15 years, I would be on projects where I did 60 or 80 algorithmic experiments.
Yes.
And just like you were describing, change the hyperparameters, do an XGBoost, do a random forest. Gosh, maybe even do a single tree.
Not 15 years ago, you weren't using XGBoost.
Exactly.
Unless I'm that old.
Even today, it's okay to do CART.
Not yet.
It's still okay, certainly as an experiment, because I always like to know the gap. Anyway, we're going down the rabbit hole. But the reason I was bringing that up is you mentioned that things started to change around 2017 or so. My experience is very similar. I think of myself as reasonably well read. I try to keep up with things. I don't think I do keep up, but I try to keep up. And I don't think I was really thinking deep learning terms until at least 2016. And you look, and we all know it's because of something unbelievable that happened in 2012, but I was busy doing my thing between 2012 and 2016. It took a while before it started to get out there in the world. So what are some of the things that happened around that time that has made what we used to do 15 or 20 years ago impractical? I mean, I'll throw out just one of my own. I would be using one platform. Like at the time, I was a IBM SPSS guy. Folks that know me well would know that in 2009, IBM bought SPSS, and that was my world around that time. So I wasn't worrying about 7 or 8 different libraries updating during the course of the project. I had one big version change a year maybe that I had to worry about, and hopefully it was backwardly compatible. So that's just one that could cause things to break. But gosh, we could probably list 20 if we gave ourselves enough time. What are some of the things that have happened since 2017 that make what we used to do just not practical anymore?
No, I mean, for me, I think the whole thing is around compute, right? In 2011, I had these 3 neural nets, and they were hourly, and each hour was lagged on the previous hour. So this neural net was 24 different neural nets, and I would have to kick it off on the weekend at Friday, and then it would be done on Monday, right? So I wasn't, and there wasn't as many options either. Like I read a white paper to do this, right? And then what you were specifically talking about 2016, which made me think about it, was I remember being in organizations and we'd talk about throwing a neural net at the problem or throwing deep learning at the problem. And everyone would say that is over-engineering the problem. But why was it over-engineering, right? Because now in 2024, like these models that we're talking about that I would kick off and run over the weekend, they're going to run in minutes. And so it's just opened up all this world. And then it's also the advancement of open source software, right? You're talking about using SPSS. I was similarly using like time series. I was using SPSS in 2013. In like 2010 to 2012, I was using like eViews and metrics ND and these specialized time series. And so you had to work with the algorithms that were in there, and you'd look in there and you'd say, okay, out of these algorithms that I have, I believe this is going to be the best one to solve my problem. And that was it. And now we just have these endless options, and we can, iterate quickly or, just so much faster than we could before. And so it's created a much different problem. But I think that we've always known that something would need to be done here to improve things, right? Like software development has been using GitHub and has thought very, heavily around what we need to do to make sure that things are well versioned and that we're avoiding these types of issues. And now machine learning is sort of a more complex, there's just more to track there and to think about, like, how should this be tracked? And so it's, the difference in algorithms, I think, is due to the amount of compute. It's the open source software. And then, with that, it made it much more glaring, the issues that we have with reproducibility and versioning.
Do you think that middle and senior management, and I'm going to even include data professionals and analytics middle management in here, how well do you think they understand what we've been talking about for the last few minutes in terms of how even fairly, what would have been an ordinary model, if there is such a thing, 10 years ago, that even that's gotten more complicated because there's so many things that could have changed from the prototyping of the model to when we're running the model, more so than we could track in a kind of semi-manual process like we were describing. Do you think they understand that? They probably know that change is happening, but do they understand this aspect of it?
So I've seen, like, in the last 2 years, I have seen, because I've searched for it like a weirdo. I will search experiment tracking and see what comes up in terms of job recs, specifically looking for experiment tracking. And so I have seen some of these. I think that the adoption is slow. I think that if I post on LinkedIn about MLOps, that people don't think it's as sexy. It's certainly not like running like a ball of fire, like, the hype around LLMs, but I do think it's getting there. I also think that even organizations, they've felt the pain of people leaving. They've felt the pain of getting audited and have it not, not having what they need there to be able to create the materials that they need to submit. And so I think in senior leadership, especially when you roll up through the tech org, there's, even if the leaders there don't understand it, they're open to the idea. They've seen software engineers work. They know that data versioning or software versioning is important. You can sort of like, connect two and two that, okay, data versioning is probably important. Like, I have seen an appetite there. Whether, they're willing to prioritize and get spend for that is a different issue. But I think, depending on where you are in the org, and I think that it is becoming a big enough of a topic that people are listening, but they maybe haven't implemented it yet. It's also scary because it's not, people didn't learn about it in school. This is going to be the next wave of, we didn't learn about it in school, but we do it now,
Yeah, but you mentioned one in particular, right? Is that they might not know all the technical details, but they might have seen some people leave. I think you really put your finger on something interesting there, because our friends Joe and Matt, I think Joe and Matt that I'm talking about, describe themselves as recovering data scientists, right? I mean, they became data engineers out of frustration that they didn't have the resources they needed to do data science without somebody doing that job. And at a certain point, they just kind of threw up their hands and said, okay, then we're going to do it, right? And I want to pick up there because data engineering is definitely on our list. I want to acknowledge, embarrassed by these broken glass, I'm wondering if a lens will pop out on camera, which we decided in the green room, so to speak, that would be hilarious. But I want to acknowledge Piyusha Kumar. Thank you for your comment. Not really in the form of a question, Kristen, but still I want to acknowledge it. Data generation and analysis. Data generation isn't so much my thing, but I would love to ask you about that. So we have 2 questions in the queue. We have to talk about data engineers, and I do want to talk about data generation. But let's pause for a moment because there are a couple of things that I want to talk about that are on the calendar. One is next week. So let's do that right away. On October 22nd, my colleague Cal, I keep on calling everybody by their first name, but I think everybody knows who I'm talking about. Yes. My colleague Cal is giving a talk here. We do these events every other month. There is a brief registration step, and that's why we have the URL. Oh, and we have a comment from Leslie. Yeah, so please do join Cal next week. You really do want to make note of that. And we have another one of our interview just like today coming up next month. We'll talk about that in a moment. Oh, here it is. It's already queued up and ready to go. Donald Farmer, who is a wonderful guy. I really enjoy hearing him speak. Oh, by the way, a quick shout out. We don't have a slide on this, but my colleague Christy, whose name I mentioned a few minutes ago, and myself and my colleague Nicholas and Donald are all going to be in Orlando. Could it be next week? That's frightening. It's going to be next week. I lose track of my own schedule. Where that's the TDWI conference, and that's a fabulous conference. Anyway, it's you'd have to be there in person to see us, but maybe it's not too late to jump on a plane and meet us in Orlando starting on Sunday. But just wanted to acknowledge that Donald will be there too, and I'll be seeing him, and we're going to be we'll be with Donald on a very similar event 1 month from now. And Leslie, thank you for your, thank you so much, Leslie, for reminding us about this. As you can see on the screen there, we've been talking about data scientists. Well, we're hiring. So you certainly do want to make a note for that. By the way, one of the things I love about StreamYard, which is the platform we're using right now, is it multicasts out to multiple platforms. So all these comments are in the LinkedIn feed. So if you were madly scribbling down the link that Leslie shared, we certainly would want you to look into that role if you're interested. Check out the comments, and I hope the conversation continues in the comments after our talk. So let me see what's in the queue. Data generation, and then after Piyush's, I hope I'm saying that correctly. How did I do pronouncing your name? I hope I did okay. But data generation is next in the queue. So what do you think?
Like, what do I think about data generation? Like, yeah, we're generating tons of data. I think that what's most exciting for data scientists and what I'm really passionate about is that the idea that, I was a tabular data person. And I think the first time I was really scared by the new trends that were coming out, right, was when everyone started talking about big data. And then I got into the big data platform and started playing with it and realized that it wasn't that scary at all, right? And so we're generating tons of data, but we're also equipped to work with it in a way that we weren't before at all. And so I think that if you're a data scientist and you're currently only on tabular data, I would urge you to start looking at the tutorials to play with LLMs. I have some, or to work with image data. I also have some of those as well. But we're generating more data than ever. We're working with different types of data, and the ability to cross over and learn new techniques and solve new problems that you maybe haven't thought about solving before is easier than ever. Not the easiest, don't want to downplay it a ton, but if you can read docs and you're a skilled data scientist and you've been working with tabular data, you should be able to start playing with other data types for funsies.
I agree with you on every count. I mean, in fact, it gets us back to the topic we were talking about a few minutes ago, and we'll move on to data engineering. But just to clarify what I meant by that, when you have the kind of scale, my apologies, I should be smarter than that. I'm having a device ring. When you have data accumulating that way, it's going to speed up the model drift, right?
Oh yeah,
it's just a constant flow. I think Piyush I think that question may have been going in a different direction. And again, it might not be an area that you've spent time in, because I haven't myself. Some of my colleagues have certainly. And that's when you have underrepresented data and you have to generate data for that purpose, right? So not just the accumulation of data. Is that an area you've worked in? Because it hasn't, but I have a feeling that was the nature of
I've had problems before where the data was imbalanced, and we had to work with that to be able to get a model that was going to work. It's certainly not something that I've maybe done that like twice and mentored something.
Yeah, it's not a specialty of mine either, but I think there are certain application areas where that's becoming really common. Oh yeah, and then okay, I think hold on just a second. Yeah, okay. Sure enough, I found it. Let's put that in LinkedIn chat for everyone. Our friend and colleague Marie did find the Halloween video from a couple.
Oh, nice.
It's just too charming.
Oh, thank you.
Not to share that. A lot of fun. Okay, let me make sure that I'm in the right comments tab here. Yeah, so let's turn to data engineering. Yeah, so a couple of things about it. How is it different from MLOps? I have my own thoughts, but I'd really like to hear yours. And then the other thing I'd like to bring up is when I first heard about MLOps, the focus really was on model monitoring and maintenance. And certainly all the things that you've already talked about are so critical to that. The versioning, why is my model going off the rails? Is it drift? Is it I've got a bad library or whatever, right? I mean, it could be any number of things. And you did a great job listing several, right? But if MLOps is the whole life cycle, and that's the way we tend to talk about it now, and data engineering is that kind of pre-modeling phase, is there the potential as these fields evolve that there's a little overlap? And overlap can be a good thing, but overlap can also be a source of conflict. Is there potentially some overlap between ML engineers and data engineers? Might there be some duplication of effort? Because I don't think anybody's figured out the organizational chart.
Yeah, so I don't see it as a duplication of effort. And I'm, not an expert on data engineers. I stay in my little data scientist bubble, but the data engineers are the ones that, get the more raw data, do the transformations so that we can get this to be consumable by analytics. But then when analytics or when the data scientist is going to create a data set to build a model, they're taking a subset of that data. It's some population or whatever that's defined by the business so that they can solve some problem. That data needs to be versioned, right? And so it's very separate. They're leveraging the data that the data engineer has made available, but you still need to version your data so that you can understand the lineage and how things have changed over time and what the most recent version of your data is that's powering that model. And then I'm sorry, when I was talking about MLOps, I completely left off model monitoring, which is super near and dear to my heart, but also I sort of see that and it's incredibly important. It's critical. You need it. Nothing drives me more bonkers than when somebody builds a model and deploys it, and then it's like it's gone off into the ether and nobody's looking at it because obviously at some point it's going to need to be retrained.
If somebody needs to come up with a name for that, maybe like zombie model or something like that.
I mean, yeah, I can't say that I haven't heard that before, but at the same time, I feel like, ML Flow and DVC are open source libraries, or you can use Comet for both the community edition. So it's free for both data versioning and experiment tracking. And you can start using those today. And evidently is also open source. And that's what I used in the book for the model monitoring piece. But in general, in industry, when it comes to model monitoring, you're not going to be using an open source tool for that, where you might be using an open source tool for versioning and experiment tracking. When it comes to the monitoring, they're going to be paying for a solution. It's more difficult to, get that adopted by the business, because if your leader wants to go make a ticket today that like, hey, you're going to go play with ML Flow and you're going to train up the team and we're going to start using it, that's something you can do. You have a talk about model monitoring, like, see you in a couple months, like.
Well, and you raised an issue a couple minutes ago that I want to revisit because I think it's a really interesting one, which is the relationship between having all of these processes in place, and no one's doing it perfectly. Let's just acknowledge that. I mean, this is complicated stuff, and we're learning as we go because things are evolving so quick. But the effect of these kinds of things that seem maybe mostly technical, maybe things that maybe mostly middle and senior management don't have to worry about, but that can actually affect retention.
Oh,
What do
yeah.
you think is the relationship between having, solid life cycle policies and best practices in place and the retention of data scientists and other data professionals?
Yeah, and I don't think it's just the data scientists, right? It's also data leadership. It's really difficult if you can't get an effective process in place, you don't have the tools in place to allow you to deliver quickly, then the business says, hey, where are these things? And people attrit, and I believe that it's all the way up the line.
Yeah, that's true. Certainly, if someone is leading one of the teams that we've described, and there are a lot of these challenges, that's a stressful place to be. Or they're leading a team as a middle manager, they're experiencing retention, and maybe they're wearing like 11 hats because when they lose somebody, they have to cover. Or the issue again that was very insightful that you raised a little while ago, where, oh my gosh, we're not tracking this as systematically as we should. We're about to lose the person who knows this best. What about our organizational memory? Our model's going to go off the rails simply because we're losing this key player. When we both
they play together, right?
Yeah,
like you're not getting the info, and you're causing the attrition.
So a little bit of housekeeping here to get caught up. First, I want to remind everybody that we're at the point that we want to shift from kind of our list of topics that we had in mind. It
we
was certainly
cover LLMs though.
Oh gosh, oh yeah, Oh yeah, we're not going to abruptly stop by any means, but I wanted to tell people it's not a bad time to start depopulating the queue. But you're absolutely right. We gotta talk about LLMs. That's our last big topic. Another little bit of housekeeping here because we have almost 20 minutes to go, so we'll be able to do a good job on that. And actually, I have a couple more on my list too. We'll see if we get to all of them. But the other bit of housekeeping is, thank you, Marie. That is fantastic. You're helping me remember things. Our colleague that is helping us with the event today. You want to follow further. So if you know some of us, maybe as individuals, maybe even me, or Kristen, or my colleague who heads up our AI and data science team, Al Dubaib. If you follow us as individuals, please follow further because that's the only way that you're going to know for sure that you're learning about all the events that we have going on. And there's a lot of exciting ones. In fact, we had 2 events today, this one included, but a colleague of mine was on a panel at 11. So we're busy out there. You want to follow us, and then also the newsletter. And a cool thing about the newsletter is subscribe to it right now. If you could just pop open another window and go ahead and subscribe. But be looking for, in a week to 10 days or so, we'll have a summary of what we talked about today. So if you've been jotting down notes and trying to find things on Google and trying to look up events, that's a great way to keep track of what's going on, including what we talked about today. But you are right. We haven't talked about large language models yet. So where do we even begin? Let's go back to 2016, 2017 or so, which would be around, actually, it's even more recent than that, right? How have large language models changed everything we've talked about so far?
Yeah, I mean, I know that I use them frequently. And I also know that, now, of course, we are using them more in business. And it's sort of like the challenges that we had with data in the beginning in terms of, just trying to figure out who owns what, how do we build these effectively, right? Because I could come up with a demo for you in a day. Like if you asked me for a demo, I could, not even scrape some stuff, copy and paste some stuff, throw it in a vector data, create embeddings, throw it in a vector database, do my thing, hit the API, show you a nice little Gradio UI, with not much on it. And if you gave me like another extra 2 days, I could, add some features there, snazzy up the UI, and you look at that and you're like, wow, that is awesome. And the challenge that I'm really seeing is that then you go to move that to production, and cool, you can set it up in like an app services or something and connect to, the Azure vector database. You can like set your things up. But what's really the problem is that the data scientist or the, right, because I think one of the things that we were going to talk about was whether this sits in data or tech. And I think, nowadays things look more like a software problem than anything else. But like the prompt testing is a piece that I feel like the dev, and this has been myself too, gets really excited to go build something. And I'm like, I can build you something. I got features. And then that not data features in a table, but features of the app. And, then it comes to, well, I don't have the context that the business needs to be able to change this prompt template. Things like, we don't want the content that's coming out to have a ton of exclamation points. We want it to be at a 5th grade reading level so that it's not using big words. And like how the essence of how the business wants to communicate with people, if this is customer facing, or even how it's, I think it's like lower risk if it's internal facing, right? But that doesn't feel like a dev to me. That feels like somebody in marketing. It feels like a content specialist. And also too, like how we're getting data to populate in the vector database. Because when we assign a data project, we've always historically been data scientists, the ones to go get data and come back and build our model. But now when the data is content, that also doesn't feel like the data scientist. It feels like it needs to be a representative from the business who's probably in marketing or a content specialist or some other area specialist who understands. Because if you have, 6 different pieces of content that all cover the same sort of thing, which is the best content? Because we don't want to be training on the data that maybe isn't the best, because then we're going to get some of like not the best back. And so these are the things that I'm really thinking about. And I think that when we go to implement these in business, I've seen it at like more than 2 places that this piece sort of drops, because the devs get really excited. They rush out to do this thing, and the business is sort of like, okay, build me this thing. And it's like, well, this thing hinges on data and prompt testing. And so like one other thing that I want to call out, because I have the floor, so I will, but one thing that I found that really removed myself as a blocker, because with the prompt testing, I'd change the prompts, I'd run it. If I wanted to work with the business and they wanted to give me prompts, I'd have to implement those and deploy it. And now you got to wait 10 minutes before you can integrate. So I built a prompt tester that allows you to, it's just a UI, but it pulls in the prompt. And so you can write the query you were going to write as though you were querying the chatbot or asking for the piece of content that you wanted delivered. And then you can modify that prompt. And then it's that prompt that you created, plus your data that you're pulling from the vector database, plus your user query is going up to the API and it's giving you a response back. And so then you're able to quickly iterate on those prompts, because you don't have to deploy each time for it to be available for somebody else to like look at or use.
Let me, I've got a
That's a
bunch
lot
of things
to unpack. I just went on a
let me remind both of us about something that to put in the queue, which is that, at Further, we're consultants. So a lot of times we're doing this on a client's behalf. And you've been in that situation as a consultant. Yep. You've also been in a corporate setting. So I want to do a compare and contrast of those 2 settings at some point. So that's in the queue. But I want to first respond to what you've been describing. So a couple of things. Dare I make a quick guess that one of the reasons that you might want to make sure that the response come back at a 5th grade reading level is that you might have an international audience. Like, for instance, the New York Times tries to keep things to, like front page stuff to like 5th grade for that reason. They've got a lot of overseas folks reading it. maybe
Yeah,
not,
so
opinion,
that's
but yeah.
one, but even if you're in the United States, like you could have people at, a lower socioeconomic or education status, and those people need to be served too. Like if we're thinking about a Medicaid population, and it's not that, everyone on Medicaid it has a lower education level, but it can be correlated that way, and we just want to make sure that we're equipped to be able to effectively communicate with everyone.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. But I wanted to jump in on that a little detail, because when I first sit down with clients to talk about large language models, I get the impression that sometimes they think that basically what's happening is you're taking the text that maybe was, let's say, typed in a chatbot. Oh, and I should acknowledge, by the way, that what we're talking about now, this idea of kind of creating a generative AI experience, is the topic next week, right? So if what we're talking about now is particularly important to you, from both the business side in particular, but a little bit of the technical side, it's also what Cal's going to be talking about, just to acknowledge. We're very much talking about overlapping topic at this point. But sometimes I get the impression that they get the impression that as data scientists, we're basically taking the text that somebody's entered in the chatbot and sending that unaltered, basically, to the large language model. And then the large language model comes back with some text, and that's basically mostly unaltered and coming back. So you've mentioned a couple of things that indicate that that's clearly not the case, like the ensuring the reading level, the exclamation points. You mentioned a couple, but you also mentioned things like you could create embeddings and so on. And it could be that not everybody's familiar with what we're talking about when we talk about embeddings, but clearly you're doing something with that text as pre-processing. Then it's going to the large language model, and then it's coming back, and there's post-processing too. Could you comment a little bit? It's almost like a little myth busting here. Could you comment a little bit on how they're different? The kinds of things that you have to think about to serve the business needs in the pre-processing and the post-processing.
Yeah. So I guess when I first start thinking about data is, where are we going to get it? How much of it do we have? But then the things that I'm typically doing, and I haven't gotten really fancy with any of the embedding models that I use. I typically just use Ada or whatever is in the default. But one of the other things that I'm thinking about is whether or not I need to chunk my data. And some of the things that we're talking about here, like I don't want people to get really scared about working with these, because sometimes these things that we're talking about, and they sound complex and amazing, and they'll be like 1 or 2 lines of code, right? And so there's just like a recursive text splitter, and that's like, hey, you know what? It's going to be useful to me if I take this document and I chop it up into chunks so that I can then use my distance calculation when I go to the vector database to find the chunks of text that are most relevant to the query that I wrote. But there could be use cases where actually you might want to have a large piece of text. Maybe there's just all sorts of things that really fit together as one cohesive piece of information, and you want to be able to send that whole piece of information up to the LLM when you're asking for it to synthesize and give you a response. And so those are some different considerations that you'll have to think of when it comes to working with your data. But I think, the thing that I like to mention is that, working with LLMs just isn't as linear as working with traditional data projects. And it is going to be, there's a diagram of the project that I did for the book in my book, but you do need to think of these as like, I'm going to work with my data. I'm going to set up my schema. I'm going to put that data in a vector. Well, I'm going to run that through an embedding model because it's the embeddings that are going into the vector database. So your embedding model gives you these vectors, these numerical vectors. And then when
turning words into numbers, basically, for folks.
Yeah. And when you write a query, the question that you would ask ChatGPT, that is then also going through an embedding model. And then they're using a cosine similarity or some calculation to determine the distance between those vectors so that they can get you the most relevant vectors back. And then that information, plus the information from the vector database, plus the prompt that we've been talking about, which defines sort of the rules for what type of response you want back and how you want that to look and feel. And then that all goes up to the API, and then that comes back. But I'm not even at any point really modeling in the traditional sense, right? I'm hitting that API. I'm using one line of code to create embeddings. It's a very different look and feel, but it's also, if you're a data scientist with some experience, it's also very achievable for you to hop in and start playing.
I would love to end on an audience question, everybody, but I also have a question at the ready that I'm going to ask now.
Oh, I'm sorry if I ranted too much.
No. We have 5 minutes.
I don't know how I got there. Yeah.
I'm warning folks that we have just enough time for an audience question. I have to, that's the one responsibility I have as host, if you want to call me that, is I have to always be thinking 2 minutes ahead for where we're going to be in 2 minutes when we wrap up. Yeah. So my question is, you've experienced on both sides. You've done consulting like I currently am doing, working with in clients that are in another organization. And you've also done data science within the organization. How are they, in your experience, how are they different? Because what you were just describing with the large language model, there's some technical detail there that may be more technical detail than you would be able to share with some internal clients, depending on their role and their desire to hear those details. How do you find that relationship to be different? Maybe you find it to be mostly similar, internal clients and external clients.
Yeah, so it's difficult because I still only have a couple data points, but I think what was the most interesting to me was how similar they were, and how, we haven't solved for this, who's going to own prompt testing, who's going to spend time doing it. And so it largely sits, and then people are saying, well, the response isn't good enough, or we don't have enough data and the response isn't good enough. And who owns this? Right. And so that's been my main takeaway. And I also think that the use cases were different, right? So it's hard to compare in the sense that if I'm building it and it's a Gradio UI, that's just very different from something that's going to be customer facing for a corporation. And the intricacy and stuff is different, but the problems,
Yeah. One difference I find is the similarities are probably more striking than they are, because even if somebody's just on a different team, you still have that consultative conversation about what do you need this to be, and then there's probably a lot of iteration, and that's all very similar, whether it's internal or external client. Topic for another day perhaps would be that model monitoring and maintenance, I think, changes a little bit when you're internal or external. But what I want to do is we probably should wrap up, unless you had a quick thought on that. But I want folks to, first, I want to thank you certainly for coming today, and I want folks to look forward to, and following further is the absolutely easiest way to do this. Look for the newsletter in a few days, and really important because it's so interesting. And I hope, Kristen, you'll play along. I'm sure you will, to keep the conversation going in the comments below this, because we both spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. You know how this works. There were folks that found us 20 minutes after we began, and they're 20 minutes behind us, so to speak, but they're in the comments and so on. In fact, in my experience, sometimes dozens or a couple hundred folks see this in the 24 hours after that weren't necessarily with us live. So I hope that you'll join in that conversation for the next couple of days. It tends to be quite spirited the first 24 hours or so. So again, everybody, I hope you will join us next month for my conversation with Donald. I hope you enjoyed the conversation today as much as I did. And keep your eye out for the newsletter. And I hope you set aside some reading time to spend some time with Kristen's book.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.